Welcome to Seafood Matters podcast. Kenneth MacNab MBE.
Thanks very much for having me for your podcast.
Well, thank you. You're going to be a great asset. You have a great history in the industry and very well respected.
Well, thank you.
You're chairman of the Clyde Fishermen's Association.
At the moment, I'm co-chair of the Clyde Fishermen's Association. I share it with another chap, Alistair Roberts, but I've been the chairman on about, I think, 3 or 4 different occasions over my career. I usually say I've had more comebacks than Frank Sinatra as far as the CFA is concerned. Well, I do it because I enjoy it, representing fishermen for a long time. Since I've been involved with the CFA since I became the local chairman in Tarbert in 1976. It was a few years after that I became chairman of the actual association, but worked my way up. It's been a long time representing fishermen, yes.
Yeah, it's great that they have somebody so capable at the helm. And I understand you're chairman of the Clyde Fishermen's Trust as well.
Yes, a few years ago, back in 2016, we thought it would be a good idea. We were arranging things away from the policy of CFA. We arranged with festivals in Glasgow to promote seafood, and through the trust we started applying for grants, and we purchased a bus, and we've actually got a new one just recently. We've got a classroom in it, and we go around schools, mostly primary schools. We educate the kids in culture and heritage of fishing over the years, and the kids love it. We show them videos of the older men speaking, and we've had some of the older fishermen in talking to them in the class and the bus, and it's gone down very well in Argyll and Bute and Ayrshire. So we're going to be pushing that a bit more this year again. We had to sort of stop with COVID. We couldn't do it during COVID, but we've got another bus now, and we're hopefully get it off the ground again.
That's terrific. That's a great idea for getting young people into the industry, because it's a real problem round the coast.
Oh, it's a massive problem, crewing, getting people to take an interest in fishing. When I went to the fishing, most of my class, they all had a connection to the fishing, and couldn't wait. We were out in fishing boats at the age of 8 and 9. We couldn't wait to get at it. Now, it's just the world we live in now. We've got social media and mobile phones, and we're seeing more of the world than we ever seen, and they know more what's going on than we ever knew. They've got more choices now, and people looking maybe for a different life, looking for a life where they've got maybe more social time. And we never thought about social time. We just thought about work in these days, but
yeah,
we still pick up a few in their teens. We've trained quite a few through the trust. We've got an agreement with the local council here, Argyll and Bute Council, and they finance part of the training for new starts to get into the industry. And we've done quite a few through the trust, I think, probably, but we've had some successes. But we reckon if you're maybe getting 3 or 4 out of maybe 12, you're doing well. Some of the ones that we train end up maybe going to the fish farm, but we don't have any say in that because the council are financing it, and the council are just quite happy for any young people to get a job, because in our area, depopulation's a massive problem. Young people leaving the area, it's bad all over Scotland, but particularly in Argyll and Bute, there's some areas where it's as high as 16-20% depopulation, people leaving, and the council do invest quite a bit of money to try and keep people in the area and keep local businesses. It's very difficult, and it's got to be full-time work. Tourism doesn't really cut the mustard in places like this, because tourism's part of the year. It's a long winter. Young people want a full-time job, so they probably leave. Most of them go to Glasgow, go to the Central Belt, go to Edinburgh, and usually once they've been at university, they get the taste of the city, and some come back and some don't. So to keep young families in the area, you've got to have full-time work, and fishing can supply that full-time work, and fish farming does as well. But it's tourism, it's maybe 6 months of the year, 7 at the most. So people won't wait for tourism. You can't bring a family up in that. So I'm glad that the council can see that now. Our Argyll Butte Council is very helpful with us. They work along with us quite a lot. They're really good.
Do you ever get people coming into the industry out with the fishing background?
Oh yes, aye. In fact, the guy that skippers the boat for me, I've still got a share in a twin rig prawner. And Davey came aboard the boat with me when he was 16, when he left school. He had no background in fishing. His dad worked in the forestry, no connection at all. But he did come out with us when he was still in school. In fact, a lot of the times when he was supposed to be in school, he was coming out. Having his pal, two of them, a very successful skipper now. No background, smart guy, and picked it up quite quickly.
That's a real success story. One thing that I did think when you was interesting, really interesting, and good to hear that the council were behind you. But I have to say, I'm up right in the very north in Caithness, and we have an 18% depopulation. So
it's tragic.
Yeah, I would say one of the contributing factors for us all. It's good to have a council behind you, but we have a government who are increased the tax on job creators.
A lot of the stuff that's come out, well, not just fishing, but lots of other things as well in rural areas. The Butte House Agreement being one, has been a real disaster for rural areas. It's not just fishing, loads of things. It's affecting now. The Butte House Agreement is starting to hit now because to start with they weren't pushing it that much, but it's really getting pushed quite hard now. It's really worrying, it really is.
On your own personal side, as well as the chairmanships, you're a Deputy Lord Lieutenant. That's a great honour.
Yes, I am. I'm a Deputy Lieutenant for Argyll and Butte. It doesn't make me the second in command or anything like that. There's about, I think in Argyll and Butte, there's probably about 8 or 9 of us below the Lord Lieutenant. And I cover the area, my area, local area here, North Kintyre. Yes, I got approached quite a few years ago now. I've been doing it, well, it must be about 9 years, 10 years, something like that. I've been doing it. It's very rewarding. It's voluntary. We do quite a lot. We do recommend people for honours and organise royal visits, but it's not too taxing, but it's very interesting. I quite enjoy it.
Is that just a purely personal post, or is that anything to do with your fishing?
No, nothing to do with the fishing at all. No, probably when I looked into it and seen what I'd done. Normally, it used to go, the lieutenancy went to the Laird or something like that. They tend to try and get business people into it now. It's moved forward. The lieutenant's moved forward quite a lot, trying to keep up with the modern way of life.
I think it's maybe, is it slightly less formal and regal?
Oh, a lot less.
Yeah.
A lot less formal now.
Which in fairness is probably a lot to do with our now king, because he's very much that way.
Well, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth was reigning when I started, and she was pretty switched on too.
Oh, absolutely.
She made lots of moves to move into the modern age. She was quite smart.
That's excellent to hear. Yeah, no, I knew that, but I know that I had what was then Prince Charles. I had the restaurant in Scrapster, and I was hugely impressed with how down to earth he was, and not for the pomp and ceremony.
It's amazing how well versed they are if they're doing a royal visit. We've had the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, a number of occasions. She actually keeps her yacht in this area anyway, so she visits the area quite a lot. It's amazing how knowledgeable they are before they make a visit. They obviously read up on everything. I remember going to the onshore fish farm on our ferry, Alistair Barge's fish farm, where they rear the halibut, and they started rearing wrasse for the fish farms, for cleaner fish for eating the lice. And Alistair was quite amazed as well that day because her knowledge before she arrived, she'd obviously read up on it very, very well, and he was quite taken aback some of the questions she was asking. They do take a very keen interest if they've got a royal visit arranged.
Is that Alistair in Gia?
Yes, they had the farm in Gia, but he still has the one on our ferry. And he's given up the one in Gia. He stopped the halibut in Gia. After the war in Ukraine, when the price of energy went way up, because it was an onshore wind farm, they used quite a lot of energy. It just wasn't going to pay, so he gave that up. But he still has his main place at Ferry in Lochfine.
Okay.
You mentioned MBE. I got that in 2016, and it came completely out of the blue. It shocked my life, actually, and especially when it said it was for services to the fishing industry. We were very honoured to get it, but when you think about it, all the work that you do, it's not really a team effort. Clyde Fishermen's Association, we'd always a good team behind us. I always treated it as though it was an honour. The CFA and the work that they had done, because I couldn't have done it without the whole team of people that were there. I was quite chuffed, actually, at the time when I got it. I do a lot of charity work, and I've raised a lot of money for the fishing in the past. I do climbing and walking and charity walks, and I do quite a lot for Parkinson's nowadays, because two of my best friends get diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I raise a lot of money for Parkinson's UK. So I'm setting off in a couple of weeks to do a couple of 100 miles. I usually go for warmer climes, go abroad, but this time I'm going to have to take my waterproof swimming because I'm walking in Scotland. I'm doing the Cowell Way, the Three Lochs Way, and the John Muir Way all together. It's over 200 miles. So I'm looking forward to that, and I can put my headphones on and listen to some of your podcasts and keep me amused, keep me positive the whole way along.
That's terrific. I'd just like to go back, if I could, on the Clyde Fishermen's Association, your co-chair. If you could just tell our listeners, I take it you're affiliated to the SFF, so you would be in Scottish Fishermen's Federation, so you would be representing the area at pretty important meetings and things.
I did in the past. We left the Federation just during Brexit. We were one of the founders of the Scottish Fishermen's Federation. In fact, the man from the Clyde, Ian Stewart, was the first president. The lawyer from Campbelltown, Patrick Stewart's father, he was the first president of the Federation and was one of the founder members of it. But the Clyde Fishermen's Association was formed in 1934. It's one of the oldest. In fact, I'd done some research in this a while back for something else I was doing. Back in the late 1800s, there was a journal that used to be printed called The Fisherman. There was a letter written into it in 1884 from somebody in Tarbert, where I come from, because they had said in the previous edition that the oldest association was from Caithness, where you are.
Okay.
But Tarbert beat them by about 4 or 5 months.
Wow.
So there was an association here in Tarbert, a herring association, in 1884, and there was 80 members at that particular time in Tarbert. And CFA was formed in 1934. But a lot of these associations were formed in these days because of the herring fishing. It was nearly all herring fishing then, starting with drift net and then moving on to ring net, pear trawl, purseine, moved its way up the scale. Tarbert, the ring net was invented here in the village I live in. It caused quite a lot of trouble with the drift net men, and there was a few, let's say, fisticuffs in the quay at times back in the late 1800s when they started with the ring net. And they actually didn't call it the ring net then. They called it a trawl. That's how it was referred to in the statute books, a trawl, which it wasn't really. It was just more like a purseine. But there was a few running battles, and it got that bad in Lochfine that they had to call in the Navy. At that time, there was no fishery protection vessels. So there was a gunboat called in, and there was a man actually shot in Lochfine. One of the fishermen got shot. The name of the gunboat was the Jackal. Things settled down a wee bit, and there was a deputation of fishermen from Tarbert, the surrounding area. They went down to Westminster and met with MPs and the government of the day to try and get the ring net legalised, which they did eventually manage to do. Then things prospered quite well round here because the ring net was a It was a good way of catching. They could catch a lot more than catch them a lot quicker than they could with a drift net. There was quite a lot of money made at that particular time. But it's a long, long history. I've looked into quite a lot, read about it and studied it quite well. But the ring net I was very fortunate. The ring net was the main job when I was still in school, and sea netting for whitefish was just sort of starting, kind of late 50s. But they were still ring netting when I was in school. But the thing that annoyed me most of it, if I was leaving school to go to the fishing, the ring net was just coming to an end. So the only time I actually experienced the ring net was as a boy, out fishing. Really exciting job to be at. And we were never off the boats when we were kids, because you could actually go, even when you were in school, you could go out on a Friday night, fish on a Friday night and come in on the Saturday morning. So you couldn't go out of school quick enough to go, because they went out in the evening and come in the morning. So you were straight home, throwing the school bag in the door and getting changed and away straight out to go to the ring net. But it was a fantastic job.
You say exciting, which it must have been, but there must have been an element of danger to it, because were you not going from one boat to the other?
Oh, aye, yes. But there was very few accidents, funny enough. When you look into it, there was actually, the crew were jumping from one boat to the other. There was usually about 6 men in each boat. Well, there would be 5 of them jumping onto the other boat when the two boats came together. That's why you would see all the fenders on the side of the boat. And you had to be quite quick. The 2 lots of fenders came together, and normally with the two boats, they would bounce back again. A couple of times, us as kids jumping aboard along with the men, you would have somebody getting the grip of you by the back of your neck and making sure you get aboard and all right. It's not a job you could work an awful lot of weather in doing that, because the boats were coming together, But some boats did work. They did work in some quite bad weather too.
It's interesting when you say that they're getting into the ring net, because I wasn't aware. I often wondered, because it was actually there in the Clyde, and maybe even Tarbert, is it, where it all started?
Tarbert started. There's a few books written about it.
Because I don't think I know of any history up north here, and even in a recent podcast with John Goodlad, and he talks about the herring as fondly as you do, but it was all drift netting.
Aye, it was all drift netting, and even when they went they went as far. They used to get right round. In fact, they went round. Some of the Tarbert boats were in Wick. They were up in Wick and fished their way round. They went down to Whitby and fished in Wick. They weren't welcomed very well in some of the ports on the East Coast at that particular time, going down. But then, once it became popular, the boats in the Firth of Forth and the Murray Firth and that, they ended up great ring net fishermen. But at the end of the day, once the boats got to it, get into it, there was a lot of really good ring net fishermen from Firth of Forth and, of course, Och. Really good ring net fishermen. Yeah. It started here, right enough, but some of the other guys mastered it just as well. As is the way in fishing. It can start somewhere and then somebody else improves on it and masters it.
Yeah.
But that's just the way it's been with fishing over the years.
That's a great thing about fishing over the years. It's improving all the time and new ideas.
And I often hear and read, because as far as fishing goes, everybody seems to remember the good days. Even myself, if you're talking about fishing in the pub and you've got a few drams and that, and the more drams you get, of course, the bigger the catch gets.
And the bigger the fish get.
But with me especially, in the back of my mind, when we went trawling that, I can still remember the massive boulders and all sorts of things we used to get, and torn nets. That all seems to get washed away, and it's a funny thing. It gets washed away in history as well, because I read some of the comments of environmental campaign groups, and all they refer to is in the sea lochs in the west of Scotland. The herring were that thick you could walk from one side of the loch to the other. God almighty, what exaggeration. I just wish I could exaggerate like that, And, people are believing that. And then, of course, people in these days, back in the 1800s, late 1800s, people who wrote journal were wealthy people who didn't need to work. And they would go for a wee tour around the west coast. And they would probably be talking to a few fishermen. And then they would write down, of course, the fisherman was maybe getting a dram or so off them or something and saying, oh, you could walk across the loch and herring. And of course, it all gets recorded and everybody thinks that's fact, when actually it wasn't fact. And I know in my own case, of my own grandfather, the fishing was, the herring would disappear. They disappeared for years. There were long times when the fishermen couldn't go fishing. There was nothing for them to do. If the herring were there in the amounts that these campaign groups say there were, all the fishermen would have been millionaires these days, but that wasn't the case. A lot of them were starving. In the village I live in, we're referred to in Tarbert as Dooker, and a Dooker is a guillemot. And we were referred to as Dookers because we ate them. And we had to eat them a lot of the times because there was nothing else to eat. And people tend to forget that. It was hard. It really was hard. The fishing was hard, and it really was. And my grandfather, at one point, they were walking, him and lots of other fishermen, living in Tarbert when there were no herring in it, and they were walking maybe 30 miles a day to build Coor House. It was about 15 miles further down Kintyre. And the man was building this massive house. And the fishermen had no work. So they had to walk in the morning and walk home at night. Or maybe go for 2 or 3 days and then walk home to build a house. Fishermen. And at one point coming up past Skipness, half a dozen of them walking home. And one of them looked out and spotted a sullen, a gannet, gone down. So nobody went to Coor the next day. All the boats were armed with a net away looking for herring after they'd seen this. And the herring appeared. The herring were back. That was them. They came back again. And that's the way it was. It went through cycles. It was cycles. It wasn't always good. One of the hardest jobs they had to do when there were no herring, they used to go to the gravel. They went down the shore, would go to the gravelly beaches and load the boats up with gravel, take them back and sold the gravel to people that were building with second homes in these days too, because the wealthy folk from the Central Belt and Glasgow, places like that, were building houses here, and they needed gravel for the paths for the houses. And that was in existence. That was hard work, shoveling gravel off the beach into a punt to take it out to the bigger boat and then transfer it and then get it to the harbour and shovel it ashore again. That's back-breaking stuff, but that's what they were forced to do. And that's what the campaign groups nowadays, they miss that out when they're making their comments because they've never experienced or never ever heard that. But if you do some research and read into what actually happened in the past, you'll find that out. But as I say, and it's always the good times that are remembered.
It's interesting hearing you on about the Dookers because it's very much reminded me of I think they call them the men of Ness at the Gugas.
Oh, the Gugas, yes.
I'll never forget. I might think you even probably know him, Alec Murray. He was skipper of the Star of Annan for a while and working up our neck of the woods here. And I asked him one day, I says, Alec, you're a Niles man. He says, I've got tubs of salt herring here. Would you eat that? He says, for God's sake, Jim, I'll eat a Guga, so surely I'll eat that.
Well, a Duker was maybe just the same as a Guga, but it wasn't far away. I ate them as a boy because my grandfather took them home. And we used to shoot them. And latterly, when I was a bit younger, and they eventually were protected, it was illegal to shoot them. But I can remember we went out one Christmas, New Year time, and we shot some anyway, and we took them in. But we obviously never took enough because I never seen as many old folk down wanting a Duker. They were wanting one. They preferred it to a turkey. But I remember it from my mother done them in the Duker soup and that. There was about an inch of oil, like grease, on top of the soup. You had to scrape off to get into it. You had to get into the soup. But it was good on a cold day. It would heat you up on a cold day.
I bet it was good for you as well.
Probably was. It was great. Well, the fishermen then get good ages then for the fishing because they ate well. They ate herring and all the oily fish, probably good for them. Now, they used to, when they went to the ring net up to the Hebrides, as we called it, the north fishing because we were further north. And they used to get the Dookers and they pluck them and they would pack them in barrels, salt them, and they would take a barrel away with them because they were away for about 6 weeks, 8 weeks at a time. Up in the Hebrides at the ring net, and they would be running back and forward across to Malik to land. But they would take a barrel of Dookers away with them just in case they get stuck somewhere where they couldn't get in and eat.
I bet you there was no chance of going into a northern harbour at anybody stealing the barrel of Dookers.
Steal the Dookers. It's not a thing you would see in the Co-op or Tesco.
Going back briefly to the ring net, obviously you had experience of both ring net and drift net. I can remember, was there ever any difference in the quality of the herring, whether they were ring net or drift net caught?
Well, I would imagine, the ring net herring, they were alive when they were coming aboard the boat. They were coming out the drift well. But I don't suppose their gills were damaged to the same extent as the drift net. But at that time, Jim, we think we've moved a long way as far as marketing goes. We think we've come a long way. But when I think on it then, they had what they called herring steamers. And the steamers went out round when the boats were fishing with a ring net and bought the herring off them at sea. And they went straight onto the steamers and they took them to Fairlie and the Clyde and the Ayrshire coast. That was the railhead. That's where your railhead was. And herring caught in the evening in Lochfine could be in the breakfast plate in London in the following morning. Now, we would struggle to do that now. That's how well organised they were. There was a rush to get the herring in the evening. They would pay better money for them. They would go alongside the boats and do a deal with them to get them to Fairlie as quick as they could because they were going to command a better price if they got them in the evening. It became later in the night, you wouldn't get as good a price because you were going to miss the train at the railhead. You would never manage that now. We could put stuff up to Bellsilver at night and it goes down overnight, but you could never get herring like that, as fresh as that. I often think about it and people say how far we've come. In some respects, a lot of the things we've done, we've went back the way. We're really well organised then, and when there was a lot of herring years ago, most of them were salted, of course, and packed in barrels, just the way they were all round the coast. And the girls did the gutting and they got packed, and most of them went to the Eastern Bloc countries. The first herring that were ever bought here in Lochfine, we've got records going back to the 1600s, and it was boats coming from Holland and France coming to Lochfine to get their herring and salt them and take them home. That's back to the 1600s. We've got records here in the castle. That's as far back as it goes.
I'll have to, unfortunately, clip your wings a wee bit as far with your history.
I was expecting that.
your history quotes from down your area. There's a gentleman I had the pleasure of meeting who wouldn't be impressed because a guy, John McCrae from Kyle. Granted, it was after he's had maybe a dram or two. And his quote would be, "You know, the McCraes are the oldest clan in the world. When Noah had his ark, the McCraes had a boat of their own."
Good.
We're going back now. When you mentioned the Butte House agreement, as you say, that was a catastrophic effect on so many things.
Well, firstly, we all speak nowadays about democracy. I reckon it's probably the most undemocratic thing that ever happened since the formation of the Scottish Parliament, because there was no mention of it in any manifesto that this was going to happen. The government of the day, the SNP government, were a minority government and obviously wanted to get a majority, so they took the Green Party in. They sat in a back room, a few ministers from SNP and the Greens, and they sat down, wrote the Butte House Agreement. I think it's probably one of the most important agreements for coastal communities and rural communities, and nobody got a say in it. There was no consultation. It was just an agreement between two political parties. We'll give you one thing if you give us this. It was written down and nobody got to say a word about it. And now it's become, it doesn't matter which bit of legislation in fishing, especially in the inshore, it's all been altered because of the Butte House Agreement. Everything's been altered because they already had a policy, the SNP had a policy, a fishing policy, and lots of that policy has had to be changed because of the Butte House Agreement. And not one member of the public had any say. That was all done between ministers, or between politicians, not ministers. So it's really worrying because a lot of the stuff, the legislation that's coming out from the Butte House Agreement is actually leaving depopulation worse than it was before. That's where it's hitting rural areas and coastal communities the most, because they're threatening businesses, local businesses that employ local people, and that got highlighted more with the HPMAs because it was going to affect everybody. All coastal and rural communities, everybody was going to be affected by it. And that came from the Butte House Agreement. Green Party insisted that 10% of Scotland's seas to become highly protected. It was never in the SNP manifesto before that, so it had to come from the Green Party. That's where your HPMAs came from, and lots of other things as well. And it's really starting to get quite tiresome because I don't think people realised at one point how serious this was. We did, through the CFA, we did. We're just waiting to see how quickly it would hit. Because the MPAs originally, that was part of the SNP that they pushed for that, the actual MPAs. But the MPAs at that particular time, we talked about them for 5 years. And we had a lot of discussion with Marine Scotland about the MPAs, but this HPMAs was just going to get thrown at us. But it's not going to end there, HPMAs. It's just, it'll rise in a different form. In fact, Nature Scott, who advises the government on these things, they had a meeting on the 23rd of December. They discussed HPMAs are not to be called HPMAs anymore. It's to be referred as enhancing protection of our seas. So they've just changed the name. That's the body that is advising the government. Nature Scott, in my opinion, are very one-sided. They're sided towards the environmental movement, and that's becoming more obvious by the day. I don't mind saying that.
No, it is worrying.
The one that worries me for this year, for 2024, is the introduction of priority marine features. That's going to be our next, especially for the West Coast, especially for the outer isles, because any small areas of scallop ground that are left, a lot of the scallop areas have been closed. We lost half our scallop ground in the Clyde in the last MPAs. Well, we lost it to dredging. You can still dive in some of these areas. But priority marine features, it's quite obvious, because we gave Marine Scotland during the MPAs all our VMS data for where the boats worked, where they dredged. So it's amazing that all the areas that we gave them permission to use VMS detail are now have just all of a sudden become priority marine features. A marine feature is protecting an actual feature in the seabed. And I remember when the MPAs were introduced, it was only a percentage of Merle Scotland-wide it was to be saved. Now they seem to want to save all Merle, and it's the same with other features like quahogs and horse mussels and flame shells, all these things. To start with, it was only a percentage we had to save, but now if anybody finds a flame shell or a sea pen through citizen science, member of the public doing citizen science, they give the information to Nature Scott. Nature Scott then advises the government there's one of these features in this area, it'll have to be saved and the area gets closed. That's the way it's heading at the moment. So anybody with a boat and a camera can go out and say there's such and such a feature here, so we just hand this in and we'll shut it down.
And
that's the way it's heading at the moment, anyway.
It's really quite outrageous how they can jackboot them their ways over all that sort of fisherman's livelihood.
I've seen what's happened in my own community over the years. Not that long ago, with a fleet of 20 boats, or before that, 30 boats in the community. We're down to half a dozen now. It's not because the boats are not doing well. The crew, partly, part of it. A lot of guys just get fed up. They get fed up with the closed areas and decided just to get rid of their boats because it was too much hassle. It was constantly arguing with people about one thing and the next. It was unbelievable what's happened, especially over the last kind of 15, 20 years. And it's getting worse. It's getting worse by the week. It's a shame to see. I mean, we're left now, we've now got a butcher. Our last bank's closing in April. We used to have 3 banks. We're left with the co-op supplying food. We used to have about 3 or 4 grocer shops. And it's not just Starbuck, but it's the same everywhere. If you take the industry that built the community away, it's going to fail. There's no two ways about that.
It's just the same story all around the coast, Kenny.
It's the same story all around because we're not getting any support from government to try and save it. That's the problem.
No, we're never going to get support from the Scottish government the way they are. But going back to the HMPAs, do you not feel that when they backpedaled on it, because I think the campaign that the fishing put up against it, I think the SNP anyway, part of it, realised a bit of more than they could chew, although nobody thinks that it's gone away. And as you say, it's going back in another name.
Well, it will do. It was great to see the support against it. It was amazing because everybody was affected. It doesn't matter who you were. The tactic now that the government have seen that everybody was united to get the HPMAs stopped momentarily, well, for a wee while anyway. But they'll be reconsidering what they're going to do next. And mark my words, because they got the shock with the unity that was involved. I think one of the main things was Skipinish's song. That the song, because it got big coverage. I mean, it was getting mentioned in every debate in the Parliament. It got a mention. And I've got to thank Mr. MacPhail of Skipinish for writing the song. Angus did a great job, and Donald Francis helping to sing the song from where it was. They've done a great job, and it certainly helped a long way to get the HPMA stopped. But being government, the way that they work, what will happen now, I reckon, they'll create a divide and conquer over the next motive. They'll start giving concessions to people. Probably the mobile sector or the fishing industry will get segregated away from the rest and get targeted. That's my feeling, having seen what's happened over the years. There'll be one section of the fishing fighting with the other. And that HPMAs was the one and only thing that everybody was united on, and that's why it got stopped. But a divide will be created from now on. They'll manage to get it in a bit at a time.
Another worrying part of it, although the campaign and that stopped it for the time being, I think rather than re-look at it or listen to what the people and the fishermen have said, I think the Greens are still looking at other ones.
Oh, they won't give up. That's their policy. I mean, the Green Party policy is to have no mobile fishing at all. That's their policy. People just don't realise that. That's part of their policy. They don't want any mobile fishing. So it's not just inshore. That's general, everywhere. And that's what you're up against. That's not going to change. And as far as the campaign groups go, as I call them, to try to refer to themselves and try to convince government and politicians that they're communities. I mean, I live in a community, but the community I live in doesn't just talk about fishing. We talk about affordable housing, we talk about wind farms in the area, we talk about education. That's what a community deals with. But these people in these campaign groups are only campaigning on one issue, marine environment. You can't call yourself a community if you're just campaigning on one issue. So I asked that question during the HPMA discussions, a number of times I asked ministers and politicians, could you define community for me? None of them ever did. They had an attempt at it, but they knew if they made the attempt at it, they'd be making a mess of it, because they don't want to be telling people that they're not a community if they say they are. Coast and Arran, I mean, that's their name. Coast, C-O-A-S-T. It's a Community of Arran Seabed Trust. But that's all they do. They just fight on one issue, the marine environment. So to me, that's not a community. That's an invented community. They've invented themselves over. I live in a community that's been here for hundreds of years, and they've invented one over maybe the course of 10 or 15 years. They've invented a community. But you can't just turn around and tell people, oh, the community say, the community wants this and the community wants that, when it's only maybe a dozen or 15 or 20 people that have appeared and got themselves together and got well organised, and really well organised. A lot more organised than normal communities would be. And that's why they get the attention that they do. I've had different views in that, because I know a lot of folk in Arran used to go in and out of Arran with the boat for years, Lochranza and Brodick, went in and out of the boat there for years. I know a lot of local people. I played golf over there every year, and they used to come over here. The people I know in Arran don't have much to do with Coast, but that doesn't mean to say that they're not well supported. There's a type of people all over the West Highlands that move into the area. They probably get more of their support from that direction.
And what kind of things do they get up to? Do they disrupt?
Not really. I mean, when Coast was formed at first with two people, it was Howard Wood and Don McNeish. And I remember they approached us. They approached the CFA right at the beginning. This is before they got the no-take zone in Lamlash Bay. And they came and had a meeting with us in Carradale. And the reason we had it in Carradale was because that's where the most scallop dredgers were based at the time. There was probably 8 or 9 scallop dredgers in Carradale at the time. And we got them over to meet them in the Carradale Hotel. And I think they were actually quite taken aback, because the fishermen, they were asking for an area, like to close an area off. The guys, the fishermen that were there that day, didn't really have a problem. They said, well, we'll pick an area that suits us round about Lamlash. They thought they thought the fishermen were going to be jumping up and down and saying no. And far from it, because the fishermen suggested to them, well, see, north of where you want the no-take zone, why don't we go into partnership and have a reseeding programme for scallops? And we'll put some money into it and reseed the area. We won't fish in it and see how the scallops come on. I get into partnership with them. Oh, this was the last thing they were expecting. So they would have obviously went away and had a think about it and said they were very suspicious. Then the next time we met, it was just Howard Wood, and the eastmost side of the no-take zone, they wanted a straight line between the Holy Isle and Arran. And we had said to them, look, it would make sense for fishermen to give us a depth of water, and we'll stay outside that depth, like a contour on the chart, rather than a straight line between a pole in Arran and a pole in the Holy Isle, going straight. Give us a contour that we can follow, and we won't go inside that depth. So it would make sense if you we're just trying to be sensible. And he would not give in on that. And then we offered, he says, look, to get that, we could make your no-take zone twice the size it is, or maybe 3 times, going in the other direction, into the bay. So he wouldn't agree to that. So he turned down, he could have had a no-take zone 3 times the size they've got at the moment, had he agreed to a contour, a depth of water, and the outside edge of it. So that day, that was when I realised that day that there was no dealing with these people. There was never ever going to be a halfway house. You were never ever going to get an agreement, we'll do this if you do that. It was never going to happen. And I was proved right with that, because every one of these campaign groups will fight until they get what they want. They'll never ever meet you halfway. And that's how it's so difficult dealing with them. They will never meet you halfway. It's only their way or no way. And that's the way it is right up till now, all the other groups that have been formed. It's their way or no way. There's no, wanting to say like, well, we'll allow you to do this here or allow you to do that there. If you leave that bit alone, we could normally, because what we've been doing in fishing, since I started representing fishing, what we've been doing in all that time is discussing with people and coming to arrangements over the years. Sometimes it didn't suit us and sometimes it did. But you had to be sitting down in discussions and eventually come to a conclusion that suited both parties. And that's the way we've always worked. But you will not do that with environmental campaign groups. No way. It's been tried. It doesn't work.
Where do they get their funding?
Oh, well, never ending the source of funding in these groups. Charitable trusts, this is what I kind of believe, and it's been a kind of bugbear of mine for years now. Charitable trusts like Esme Fairbairn, well, now you've got bigger groups like Blue Marine, and it's all charitable money, but and for the life of me, I kind of see how they can get that money and say it's charitable money when you're using the money to put people into poverty. That always rankled with me, how a charity can call themselves a charity if they're using the money that they have to put people out of work and put families into poverty, because that's what they're using the money for. I mean, they keep speaking about, same as the government speaking about just transition and all the rest of it. That's another phrase that nobody has ever managed to convince me a proper definition of it, and it's used all the time. But this just transition seems to mean that we're going to be out of work and we're going to have to train to do something else. That's what it boils down to. The job you're doing doesn't suit us. It doesn't suit climate change. It doesn't suit ecosystems. So you are just going to have to bear the brunt of that, and you're going to have to. I mean, you can't even sell your business because who's going to buy your boat? Because nobody else is going to have any work in inshore. So you're not going to be. Your boat's going to be worthless. Your business is going to be worthless. So you can't sell it. So you're just going to only place boys a brew. That's it. That's what they're forcing people to do. And the more you do that in communities, the worse it's going to get for the communities. There's no rational thought getting into any of these decisions these people make.
And am I right in saying that they're integrated throughout society? They're not just in the Green Party?
Throughout society, I mean, it's a massive movement. It's a massive movement. It's something probably never going to change. It's whether you have a milder form or a more militant form that you're dealing with. It's in categories now. They're so well organised. Coast and Arran got to hand it to them. Everybody's copying the same model as Coast, right up the West Coast, and in the East Coast now too as well. They follow the same model. They get a few people in, get it started, get it off the ground, and then the people like Flora and Fauna International, Blue Marine, the group gets together, they make an application, they get money to create a coordinator. The coordinator organises the group, which setting up a mafia family. it's like, but they're very well organised and there's no shortage of money.
There's no likelihood that they could be getting public money, could they?
Oh, well, it has happened, yes. Aye, it's happened. And we had to do an FOI in this one. Coast and Arran got a new boat built just last year, a catamaran, and it's to do survey work. Coast Explorer, she's called. We heard it because through the Clyde Fishermen's Trust, we were wanting to do, we wanted to do, and we still want to do our own science. We'll be starting it this year anyway. But it would have been great if we could apply to Nature Scott, where this fund was supposed to be, that the Coast were getting the money. We approached and we couldn't find the fund. And we're a bit puzzled with this. Where's this man? Because you're talking here about a boat that cost about 150,000, plus I think there was money for other equipment and supplying staff. It would probably wouldn't have been much short of 200,000. It turns out they were just given the money from Nature Scott. We done an FOI on it to find that out. Nature Scott just gave them the money. And that's taxpayers' money, public money. We've mentioned it to government. We haven't pushed it so far. We might have to. But is that fair?
That's outrageous.
It is outrageous.
Kenny,
Absolutely
if you don't
outrageous.
mind me stopping you, the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear that, they got that money, as you say, to put other people in other jobs out of work, finishing businesses, ways of life in coastal communities, and yet up here in the north where we are, some of the reasons we talked earlier about depopulation, but a lot of the reasons why we are losing people, it's mostly the last people you want to use, young people, because people can't, a young mum to be can't have a baby here any longer. They have to travel at least 125 mile to Inverness, and on some occasions 250 or 300 mile to Glasgow, Edinburgh or Aberdeen, and risking their lives getting there with potholes on the roads. We're in a shocking state, and all you'll hear is about councils almost into receivership, government with a black hole that they're probably the Scottish government that they'll never get themselves out of the way they're carrying on, and yet they find a pocket of money for that lot.
Aye, well, it's quite unbelievable, and it gets worse. It gets worse because they've been out with an ROV, which I don't know whether they've got their own ROV, but that wouldn't be cheap either. They're out doing citizen science and passing all this information on to Nature Scott, who then makes the decision, who are advising the government. They've paid for some, because now Coast are advertising the boat for hire. So not only did they get given the money, but they've created a business and they're going to get paid. I wonder, will they be giving the money back to Nature Scott? Will they be paying the money back? I would like to know that. I doubt it very much.
That's another FOI in the future.
It will be.
Something's got to come to light about that.
Well, we see things like that fairly regular, but it's become so common, especially in the financial side.
Yeah, but it seems to be the style of our Scottish government now. Anything can bounce off them, they just ignore it.
Well, I'm concerned not so much with the government, because Nature Scott's supposed to be neutral, although they're financed with public money. It concerns me that they're doing things like this. Then, when it comes to closing an area, they're not going to listen to us. They're going to listen to people at Coast that gave them science. Whether the science is right or no, God knows. We always, through the CFA, if we were ever wanting, we done science on the trials that were done in the Clyde, 2016-17, went into partnership with Marine Scotland to do trial. We supplied the boats, the gear. We done it along with St Andrews University, and it was going well until Marine Scotland stopped it. We paid, and they paid money into it. They decided just to stop it. And then, of course, COVID came along, and there was nothing done anyway. But we've been keen ever since then to get it started again. But they keep telling us about no resources. There's no resources, we've no money. And then you look at what Nature Scott handed to Coast. If we get 200,000, we could have done a massive amount of science, especially now that we've got a cod closure. And that we've got a cod closure because, and it's there, and it doesn't need to be there, and they've got no science, but we're doing it anyway, we're closing it anyway, but we've not got any science.
Is this the Operation Galeen?
Yes, that was unbelievable when they published their Operation Galeen. My God, the SAS would have been proud of that. It was more like a mission in Yemen or in the Gulf, the way it was worded, Operation Galeen. Everybody was in full standby for a dozen boats at the most. And the Scottish Government Marine Directorate said that the only science that they had from the 2 year previous, like last year, they were boarding the boat about 20-30 mile away from a closed area. Any trawlers, they were boarding them, and they were counting the cod that the boats were getting. And they weren't even sexing them or anything like that. Nobody aboard that was capable of doing that. They just counted the cod that the boats were getting. And it was hardly any anyway. And they pumped that figures into a model. If you put rubbish into a model, you'll get rubbish out the other end. And that's what they've done. And that's the science. But there's no science been done in the area that's closed. I mean, what they don't realise is with the cod closure, we, the CFA, instigated the closure over 20 years ago now. There was a good stock of cod, spawning cod, coming in every year. And the problem was that at the time, they closed the Irish Sea to the cod fishing. And we were worried, now that the Irish Sea was shut, the Irish fleet were going to move in when the cod spawning time was on and wipe out what was happening in the Clyde. So the whitefish boats, we had about half a dozen, maybe 7 whitefish boats at the time, dedicated whitefish boats. And they agreed that should close the area. It was a smaller area at the bottom end of the Clyde where the cod spawn. And first year it was voluntary, and then after that it became mandatory. Into the second year, the Marine Scotland made it mandatory after that. And that area was closed for 20 years. And a couple of years ago, every year Marine Scotland would get in touch to renew the closure. We just responded to it, saying just a rollover, just the same as it was before. And there was a consultation done, and 16 groups responded to the consultation. And out of the 16, 14 agreed to a rollover. And they extended it for 2 weeks because there was a complaint from the campaign groups. And those 14 agreed to a rollover, and 2 campaign groups didn't agree with it. They wanted a bigger area closed, and that's the way it went. So 2 groups, 2 campaign groups, Marine Directorate, as they're known now, and the Minister agreed to what the 2 campaign groups wanted, but the 14 others were discarded. Now, that's democracy for you. That really is democracy for you. That working at the
Scottish democracy.
At its worst. Unbelievable. And the way that's been handled. I've been in a few Zoom meetings and Teams meetings with the ministers and clients and all the different people that are involved with that cod closure, which is going on at the moment. That's an 11-week closure. It includes creels and diving and everything. Some of the guys shift their creels. There's nowhere to put them. They've not got any room to put the creels anywhere. They were in the box, and they've had no problems at all with the trawlers because guys just had to move. I mean, we're only interested in catching prawns now. They seem to think that we're going to go into the box and fill the boat with cod. My God, they must be living in a fantasy world.
Well, they do that. They do live in a fantasy world. They're not real.
Oh,
they're not in the real world.
They're living in a complete dream world. I looked at the Rural Affairs Committee, the discussion there a couple of weeks ago, and Alan Gibb was on helping the minister out. I think even he isn't up to speed with what's happening. When they were talking about creel numbers, I don't think he knew, or he didn't even mention it when he was giving evidence. The CFA has a voluntary agreement through their IFG on creel numbers. The local creel men, voluntary, through the IFG, the Inshore Fisheries Group, I think it's about 400 creels for crab and lobster and 1,000 for prawn creels. He more or less said there wasn't any restrictions in creel numbers, but they won't agree to do it. The government won't agree to do it. The creel men want restrictions, but it seems to be a problem for the civil servants to actually get it underway. I'm trying to remember back, just when we're talking about this, Jim, before the days of the Scottish Parliament, I can remember going down to Defra, Whitehall, and Duncan McInnes from the Western Isles was with me.
Know him well.
And that's what we were discussing, creel numbers. Way back then, we were discussing creel numbers to try and get some sort of thing off the ground. And nothing's been done since then. Nothing. Even Duncan and I actually thought when Scottish Government, when the Scottish Parliament was formed, we would have a better chance of maybe getting the creel number thing sorted out. It's never ever been done. And that's bad management. It's nothing to do with the fishermen.
It's bad management, but it's grossly irresponsible and unfair as well, Kenny, because I had an involvement in the Clyde. And the Clyde fishermen had their own voluntary weekend ban. And it's your organisation that you're co-chairman of now. So they're talking about people who are historic as far as being very responsible is concerned.
You're right, Jim. As far as areas around Scotland's concerned, the most conserved area is the Clyde. There was a gentleman's agreement, voluntary agreement originally about weekends. And then eventually we asked to get it mandatory and it became law. you're not allowed to fish at the weekend with mobile gear in the Clyde now. It's against the law.
Is that still the case, or is that law now,
yes,
not voluntary?
It's a law now, yes. It's been the law for, I think it was in the mid-80s, it became law. No mobile fishing. You can fish with static gear. But that was generally the way that nobody worked at the weekend anyway, past, and we wanted to try and kind of keep it like that. I think it was one of the best things ever we done for the Clyde. I mean, the Clyde's a very productive area. There's an awful lot of prawns and stuff comes out the Clyde, and I think that 2 days at the weekend, because sometimes it falls during slack tides as well. You boats don't get the benefit fishing the slack tide because it's over the weekend. I reckon, in my opinion, it's one of the best things that ever happened for the Clyde. And the other thing it done, it lessened the chance of conflict with creels, because the boys go out and work their creels at the weekend, prawn creels, and they can get them out onto where the boats tow at the weekend and then move them back in on the Sunday night again for the trawlers coming out on the Monday. So it kind of worked quite well. And we've got a restriction in the size of the boat that can come into the Clyde as well, 70 feet. We've had that for long time. It doesn't work with whitefish and prawns and scallops and that. You're limited to 70 feet, but pelagic, there's no limit on. You can come in with a big pelagic boat into the Clyde for some reason or other. We've always been very keen and conserving what we have, because it's not a big area. For the size of the area it is, it's very productive. And always has been.
This closure just now, is it the whole Clyde or part?
No, Jim. It's at the bottom end where we had the original closure, but they've expanded it right round the south end of Arran and take it right down to Ailsa Craig. It's all the bottom end of the Clyde, all down at the bottom end.
But even from what you're saying,
big area.
Even from what you're saying there about how they don't really monitor, I remember just in a recent podcast with an ICES scientist, and I asked his views on closed areas. And he says, okay, to a degree, but he says, you've got to keep monitoring it. Even,
there's hardly any monitoring been done in any of these MPAs. Well, not to the extent that it should be done. The management of these MPAs is just nearly non-existent. Because it's lack of resources, to say, but they've got resources to supply fishery cruiser, 2 ribs, the use of a plane in every fishery office in standby and full alert for 11 weeks. And I'm pretty sure it'll be somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million it'll be costing for compliance for the whole 11 weeks. If that money had been spent in science, we wouldn't need to be doing that.
Well, if they're obviously not even taking the advice of the scientist either, as well as the fisherman, because that's a scientist that made that point to me. But going back there to your comment when you say about the ribs and protection and all fishery officers and everybody on alert, are we talking about the coast of Scotland or the coast of Ukraine?
Well, it's an awful lot of taxpayers' money that is getting wasted, in my view. Well, I'm a taxpayer, and I don't think it's good value for money. They say that it's a risk factor. I said, well, risk. Well, a dozen boats that have got no intentions of being in there anyway, but you've got other closed areas, maybe in the North Sea or further north, where there's maybe 50 boats, and it's no risk. So explain to me where the risk is. I've done risk assessments for a long time in the boat now. I wouldn't put it down as high risk. It's definitely low risk.
What protection vessels have been involved?
Well, the Jura was there. He's away now because they seem to have relaxed a bit. We would have had a bit of pressure on him. But he'll be back, no doubt. He's away, but the ribs are there. The ribs are out weekend, I think. Ribs are there and the fishery officers are still there. The Jura went away. I was quite amazed that in the first week, it shows you the way compliance, the Marine Directorate, react to complaints from campaign groups, how quickly they react. The first week, the Jura was there. One of the things that they said is AIS would be on at all times. You would see him at all times, the Jura, and his AIS was on at all times. And we were a bit puzzled one night, kind of late afternoon in the evening. Here he was doing the bottom end of Arran between that and Ailsa Craig, and the next thing he's doing about 12 knots, going up to Milliken Tire. And we thought, he must be going away somewhere. He's only there a week. He steamed for about 60 miles right up to the mouth of Loch Sween. And one of our members, one of the CFA members, was at the prawns. It's up Kilberry area, north end of Gia, between Gia and the mainland. He went in to drop his anchor in at the mouth of Loch Sween. And Loch Sween's closed. It's another area. It's an MPA and closed. But he went in, but his AIS and obviously his VMS, which is a boat about 16 metres, he went in to drop his anchor for the night to get a sleep. The Jura steamed because they seemingly got a report that he was in a closed area and steamed for 60 miles. They had to know he was at his anchor because he was stopped and his AIS was on and they could see him in his VMS. So he wasn't moving, he was at anchor. But still in all, they steamed 60 miles. When he got up in the morning, came alongside him and asked him what he was doing. He said, "Well, we're in for a sleep." I was just wondering, thought you were in Loch Sween. So they went up as a daft. But, and then they steamed 60 miles back to the Clyde again.
Well. And did you say that was the Jura?
That was the Jura. That's not good value for money either as a taxpayer.
You know, there'll be a real bone of contention amongst a lot of fishermen with that, hearing that story, Kenny. I'm so pleased you mentioned it. And I'll tell you one example. I've just recently done a podcast with Alan Addison. You know, he's on the Venture 4.
The Venture, yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And 2 points he's made, which, funny enough, one of them mentions the Jura. I think it's July last year. He was in the Rockall Bank, him and a boat, the Aquarius, and there was a Spanish-owned but registered in the UK, flag of convenience as we call them. So there was the flag boat there, the Aquarius and the Venture. Here the Jura steamed out. He boarded the Venture, then he boarded the Aquarius and left and never even spoke to the flag boat. Never even spoke to the Spanish skipper or crew. Never even called them.
Unbelievable.
And also, as well as that, in the same podcast with Alan, and he mentions, rightly so, but we're all experiencing it here, how horrified we are with the damage to the industry, the seabed, all that. Everything you want to mention, the future stocks that this foreign owned, although a lot of them are British registered, they're non-UK, let's say. And he goes on to say how they're fishing in packs and they're very aggressive, and yet they cannot get a fishery protection vessel to board them at sea. They're not monitored ashore, and yet the Jura, in the middle of all that, steamed 60 miles just to check somebody at the anchor in a sea loch in his bed.
Unbelievable. But that just seems to be the way it is now. It's difficult. I really worry at the way things are going at the fishing. It's the way they handle people and the way they handle the fishermen. They could do with getting some training on it. You feel as if you're guilty all the time, although you're working within the law. It was one of the things that made a bone of contention about last year with the closure. When the minnow was there, he just kept tailing a boat. He would tail a boat beside him and not board him. It was like intimidation, tailing beside him and not asking him to lift. And the boat would be prepared to lift, get his gear measured and get it out the way. But when they do that, they were just tagging along beside him. And as we said in the meeting with him, a similar situation would be if you were in your car that was MOT'd and you were insured and everything was hunky-dory with your car and you were driving in the M8 between Glasgow and Edinburgh and there was a police car in your tail the whole distance and you'd be sitting there saying, that's intimidation because it's no stop me, you're just tailing me the whole way. And that's what it felt like for the boys last year. We explained that to them, but they started off this year doing the same. It sort of stopped and they've gone away now anyway, but they'll probably be back at some point.
We maybe need to get a campaign group organised, pro-fishermen.
Oh, aye. We could apply to one of these charities and get a couple of 200,000 or 300,000 form a campaign group, get a coordinator, the way the professionals do it.
Another part, I don't know if anybody's at it in the Clyde area, always find it strange how you'll never hear any of that green groups mention, and it's so bad for the environment. Aggregate dredging.
Mm-hmm.
And it's millions of tons for the building industry.
You get that dredging, you never hear them speaking about it. And it's the same with the wind farms. We've got one coming off West Isla. I remember having discussions with them a long time ago, must be 10, 12 years ago, when they first mooted the idea of a wind farm out there. And they asked us, what's your opinion? And I remember a guy from Isla, that was secretary at the time, Archie, said, if I was looking for somewhere not to put a wind farm, that's where I would put it. With the wind and the tide that run out there, it's going to be impossible to service it at the time. They're going ahead with it. They're going ahead with it anyway.
They'll go ahead, yeah.
And we've had a lot of bother over the years with cables. A lot of cables come out of the Clyde to go to Ireland. Really big cable. Kintyre's actually covered in wind farms now. And they've done it all back to front. They built the wind farms only to discover that there's no way of selling electricity. They couldn't get it out, and you cannot store it. So a lot of these wind farms were been whirling away for about 15 years, and nobody's getting any benefit of it until they put the cable in. It runs from Crossing and Kintyre over to Hunterston, and now they can get the power out, they can get the energy out. But there was years and years and years that these wind farms were going up, and nobody was getting any benefit of it. It just shows you. That's the way things are done nowadays. They do everything backward. The first thing you would normally do is put the infrastructure in, put the cable in first, and then put the wind farm. It doesn't get done that.
The real bone of contention, especially up our way, but I'm sure it's probably around the whole coastline, Kenneth, is you get countless people asking, how come the sites they pick for their wind farms on shore, it's some of our loveliest beauty spots, and at sea, it's our best fishing grounds?
No, all the time. And we don't just have wind farms, we've got a lot of fish farms. We've got dealing with 2 applications at the moment for new farms. We've got lots of extensions, and some companies we get on okay with, and some others we don't. We've lost an awful lot of ground to fish farms, and especially Loch Fyne. I mean, the whole loch, it's a lot of areas that we fished are just lost to fish farms now. But at the end of the day, we've got to work along with them, because although we're not providing the employment we used to provide, but the fish farms are. So in a way, they're helping to save the community. So we prefer to work along with them. We work along with the fish farms quite a lot. If they're making an application, they usually speak to us first. Some of them, they'll discuss where they're putting it, and if there's any way they can alter the grid system where their anchors are to suit us, where we'll still get to fish. The way we've always worked, and it's the way you can work with them, you can work with government, but it's just you cannot work like that with campaign groups, but we can work with the fish farms.
When you mentioned there that you can work with some fish farms but not others, is that just the people that are involved in them, or is there... It's
just the companies, aye.
Okay.
It's just some of their policies, probably, Some are easier to work with than others. You can work with them to a certain extent, but when they start getting a bit like when we're dealing with coast to start with, you'll have to do it our way or no way. That gets worrying. To start that kind of speak doesn't go down well with us. We'd rather work along with them. Well, I'll be heading off to the FMAC meeting this week, because I haven't been to one for years, but Elaine, our secretary's down in London, so it's on Thursday, I think, so I'm away for Edinburgh.
What's the FMAC?
It's fishing, all the fishing associations, the federation, and that's in it. And that was one thing I didn't mention, Jim, about leaving the federation. We just sort of brushed over it, but we came out during Brexit. Just after the vote, when we were coming out, we left the federation, and we were one of the founder members, the CFA. We had to think very, very carefully, but we came to the conclusion that the federation, we weren't getting the representation in the inshore that we thought we should have been getting. It was more offshore work that was been done. And we were seeing it had been going on for a few years. We weren't happy for quite a while. And eventually we made the decision. I was very wary of doing it. We eventually made the decision and left the Federation. But after we left, we got involved, and there's a new group being formed in Scotland. It was formed just after that. It's called the Community Inshore Fisheries Alliance, CIFA. And we've got quite a lot. We've got over 400 boats, inshore boats, as members, nearly as many as the Federation. But our associations are the Clyde, Western Isles, Galloway Static Gear Association. We've got the Orkney Fishermen's Association are in it as well, but they're also in the Federation. And so we work through CIFA now, and we deal with government. It's the same as the Federation. It's an entirely new group that was formed, Communities Inshore Fisheries Alliance, CIFA, and we represent inshore fishermen at all government levels now. So I think we're in a better place than we were before. It's all our own kind that we're dealing with, all inshore fishermen. There was an awful lot of times in the Federation when we were discussing things that were happening offshore with the bigger pelagic boats as well, which didn't really concern us a lot of the time, but we felt a lot of the Federation's time was taken up with that, and we were getting kind of ignored a lot of the time. But we still deal with the Federation, still speak to them. It wasn't a bad break. We still have conversations with them. I wish them well in anything they do.
Good. Is there a danger that more groups, it gives governments an opportunity, well, this type of the government we're dealing with just now, a way of getting round and past when it's not one voice?
Well, we thought about that too, Jim, but all the people that are part of CIFA were never in a federation anyway. The way we were in the CFA, they weren't getting the representation. Now that we're all these smaller groups, they're together, formed a group of people that are getting representation now that weren't really getting it before.
Yeah. What's your own fishing background, Kenny?
Well, I'm a fifth generation fisherman. My ancestors fished herring in Loch Fyne, West Coast, going way back. And on one side of my family actually fished buyers, like herring buyers at one point. And of course, I thought I was destined for the fishing when I was in school. My father got his first boat in the early 50s. Then he got a new boat built, 1968, 69. And I was just leaving school 1970 after sitting O-levels. But he had told me that on one side of his family, most of his family were in the Merchant Navy, coastal skippers and foreign masters. So he said, because my eldest brother was at the fishing on the boat, and the next brother, he became an accountant, and he was going to university. My dad says that, no, you're going to the Merchant Navy. So I thought I was destined for the Merchant Navy, and he'd arranged for me to go away after I sat my O-levels at the end of the year. Well, in the back end of the year, October time. So I came out of school and went onto the new boat. It was just the start of the sort of prawn fishing, prawns and whitefish. They were doing quite well. And I remember my wage as an officer cadet in the Merchant Navy was to be somewhere about £15 a week. The average wage, I think, in the boatyard in Tarbert at the time was about £25. The first week, we had a discussion, my pal and I, who was in the butcher shop. He said, he got £16. I said, well, I get the shock of my life. My dad put me in a half share. And mind you, I never got much of the sleep all week. I had about £90 in a half share. One thing I got, one O-level I got, was I was quite good at arithmetic, maths. And I said to myself, I'm leaving this to go away to the Merchant Navy for £15. I'm not that daft, so I don't know how I was going to tell him, but I mean, we didn't get that every week, but it was quite a good summer. It was quite steady all summer. And I said to my mother, and she says, well, you'll have to explain to your dad. He'll maybe not take it very well, but he took it actually all right. And I ended up going aboard the boat anyway. And he said, well, if you're going to be here, you'll come into the wheelhouse. Because my eldest brother was keen in the mechanical side, engines, working in the deck. He didn't feel confident enough to take the boat. So that was the start of my career, taking boats. I spent 3 years, I think it was, and then I actually left to go. A good friend of mine got a wee boat built up in Scapa Flow in Bury, Duncan's of Bury, a clinker built boat, and
Good boats they
he
were
got that
too.
built. Aye, they were great boats. Aye, fantastic. But still in the go down in the Clyde. We went, and the plan was we were going to go. We were drift netting for salmon because before, while I was still in school, this guy and his pal they had bag nets. The bag nets in West Loch Tarbert, and we worked them during the summer. So we thought we'd try the drifting. But she was fitted. She had a wee trawl winch in her as well, and a net hauler and pot hauler, and we got a couple of 100 pots as well. And I spent a few years there, and it was actually learned a lot there, learned an awful lot. I went back, my dad wanted me back in the boat again, and that was when I bought a share in the boat, third share along with my brother and my dad. Went back fishing, and then we eventually sold that boat, bought a bigger boat, and then while I was skippering the next boat, my dad sadly was killed in a car crash, and just at the same time as I was getting married, put a bit of dampener and things. Well, I went on after that and ended up with four boats at one point, and also had a small processing business as well where we sold direct to restaurants. I'd done that for about 15 years as well before eventually selling it. But during the whole time, I represented the fishermen as well. Pretty full on at times. So right up to date, right up to now, I've got a small boat that I've fitted out during COVID. It was fitted with fish wrasse for the fish farm, and we have lobster gear and velvet gear out myself and my nephew. This little catamaran, 8-metre catamaran. But I'm still involved with a bigger boat, a twin rig trawler. And the guy that skippers it left school to come with me when he was 16, and he's very successful now fishing for prawns. Well, that takes me up to today pretty well.
That's pretty interesting and fulfilled life.
I've been busy. I've not had much time to think.
If I could take you back a wee bit, Kenny, you mentioned the early 50s, the boat. Is that your dad that started then? Or
That was my father. His first boat, I mean, he was a ringnet fisherman originally, and he came home after the war. And the fishing wasn't that great after the war when the guys come home. And a lot of the boats had either been taken by the Navy or there was very few boats left. During the war, there was no younger men to crew them. It was all older men that had to crew the boats. So after the war, he actually got a job. For his first job, his uncle skippered the cargo boat that ran from the Clyde right to Inverary every day, delivering cargo, because the road system at that time wasn't good. It took an age to get to Glasgow, so nearly everything got delivered here and went to Islay, came through Tart, all came by boat. And it was the same time there was a steamer. Everybody went on back and forward to Glasgow by the steamer. Nobody hardly used the road at that. Well, not very many folk had cars anyway. But he got a job in the cargo boat with his uncle, and then it was quite hard. It was quite a hard time of year because a lot of the fishermen ended up working. There was a hydro scheme, which were quite a few in Scotland. There was one up at Loch Shear at the head of Loch Fyne, and there was busloads of guys left here every day and went up there when they were building the hydro scheme, and quite a few of them went to work with a company Scots that were putting in the telegraph poles for the hydro. That was other work at the time. Some of the fishermen, they were looking at whitefish at that point, and so he bought a 40-foot boat because it was legal to use the sea net inside the 3-mile limit in the Clyde, but you had to be under 40 feet, and you could fish inside the 3-mile limit, but in the Clyde, you had to be under 70 feet. So there was a few rules like that. So at that time, there was quite a lot of 40-footers either bought and built around that time specifically to fish inside the 3-mile limit with the sea net and the Clyde. And a lot of the boats from the East Coast used to come here in the winter time, from Peterhead, Fraserburgh, and further along, right along the Murray coast, come down here in the winter time to fish at sea net in the Clyde. And he done that in his own boat. He fished in another boat to start with, then he got his own boat. But it was at the same time, the sea net, there was quite a lot of boats at it, but they started experimenting with the prawn trawls and the nets that would catch fish and prawns, dual purpose nets. So he got into that, and he'd quite a successful career at it. my dad.
Yeah, what it made me think of when you said that was very similar, funny enough, to my own father. And it was always family boats then. And a cousin of mine, he was a fisherman all his days, Davy from Helmsdale, he still lives there. I often say to him in the conversation, it must have been a hugely exciting time because there was 5 brothers volunteered, they were in the Navy for the war, and 5 came home. And they bought the new boat, the Mysotis called it, and started fishing. So it must have been a small village, but it must have been a hugely exciting time.
Oh, it must have been. No worries like what you have nowadays. There was no licenses, no quotas, no campaign groups trying to stop you. I think it was a more relaxing time, really. There was pressure. There's always pressure at the fishing, but there wasn't so much of this outside pressure that you have nowadays. They didn't experience that the way we're experiencing it nowadays. I don't see it.
Did you not feel, although there was pressure and there was regulations and rules, even then it wasn't free for all, but you could make sense of them? And I always feel that give fishermen something that makes practical sense, they'll buy it.
Oh, aye, they'll fall into line with it. It's just the way of fishermen. The way it is nowadays, it's constant negativity. I think over the last 15 years at least, there's so much negativity against fishermen, and we have a rising problem with young people with mental health problems. All this negativity doesn't help. It doesn't help people's health. I think it's going to have long-term repercussions going forward. All this negativity constantly getting churned out and thrown at us, it's going to tell in the future, because going in the past, there was far more positive views. Fishermen, they always got to be positive at the fishing, or you won't survive at it. And you've got to be optimistic, and you've got to be positive about your job, or you won't survive. And being bombarded with all this negativity, I don't think it's good for anybody's mental health. And it's creating a problem, I think, generally, maybe not just in fishing, but generally in the population.
You say that, but I'll tell you, a gentleman I'm quite sure you know very well, Mike Park, said at a recent podcast he classes himself as an optimistic pessimist.
Well, I think Mike's probably right. And Mike and I, we've known one another for a long, long time. I've not seen him for a while, right enough, but since we left the SFF, Mike and I were at meetings a lot. I can see where he's coming from with that one, because it's very difficult sometimes to be optimistic, especially when you're somebody like Mike who knows all the answers.
Yeah. If we could move on, I'd like to ask you, what do you feel about open seas? Now, I don't follow them. I don't like their style or what they say, but it looks to me they just have an open attack on our prawn fishing.
Well, open seas have been in the go for a good number of years now. Then again, I very, very rarely ever hear open seas saying anything positive about the fishing industry. It's negativity constantly. It doesn't matter which subject, but that's what keeps them in business. There's got to be something wrong to keep them in business. The campaign that they've got going at the moment, the Don't Eat Scampi campaign, it's absolutely atrocious. Without having any proper discussions about it, they just go willy-nilly onto social media and start a campaign and telling people to stop eating scampi, tell the supermarkets they shouldn't be selling it until it's approved fishery. These things take time, and fishermen have been working on it for a long time, trying to get accreditation. It's not as if they've not been doing anything. They've been trying very hard to get accreditation, and then to go and just jump because it suits them, because scampi, as we call them, the prawns, are the smaller ones that the trawlers tail them when they go for the UK scampi market. And so, in a roundabout way, it's their outlook is they want to stop mobile fishing in inshore waters. And they see this as an angle how to do that. This is the angle. If we stop the boats making any money, they'll have to go and do something else. I mean, what a way to deal with what they think even is a problem. What a way to deal with it. Like, we'll just go and put them out of business, and that way they'll need to stop it. If we can ruin their market, ruin their shanty market, we'll get rid of them. That's an unbelievable attitude to take. And then they're walking into a room, into an FMAC room, to sit down with fishermen. And it makes it even more difficult for fishermen to even speak to them. And I think as far as fisheries management's concerned, I don't think campaign groups should be anywhere near it, because they want to destroy what we want to keep. And there's no middle ground with them. Fishermen discussing with managers about a fish will eventually reach a conclusion and find a balance to go ahead. We'll never ever reach a balance with people at open seas. They're just going to carry on, and they will carry on because they've got a never-ending supply of money to do it.
Yeah, for something to be not sustainable and try to stop it, my God, it's gone on for tens of years. And no fisherman goes out to sea to see if he can catch the last of any species.
No, you're totally right, Jim. And they never ever give any praise to fishermen for what they've done over the years to make fisheries sustainable. Not once have I ever read a positive comment. The difference that the fishermen have made over the years, especially in the bottom trawl fishery, is the increasing mash sizes, introduction of square mash panels, low headline trawls, everything to avoid catching any bycatch along with the prawns. I mean, now it's nearly a clean fishery. Because of the Clyde cod box, we had an observer out from Marine Scotland in our own boat 2 days, the start of last week, for a couple of days, just to check if we're catching the hundreds of boxes of cod that open seas reckons everybody's catching. But they're obviously invisible cod because they're not there. But he was checking all our bycatch for the 2 days. And the first day we had, I think it was 700 kilo of prawns. We had about 8 kilo of bycatch. The guy's away with all the figure. I mean, it's nearly clean prawns. Plus, I think it was 2 codling we got, 2 small codling. And the next day, it was even less discards the second day. You go into social media and you see the out-of-date pictures from donkey's years ago and videos from years ago that Open Seas blithely put on to try and brainwash the public into stop buying scampi. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's terrible. They don't realise, well, I think they do realise because they get told often enough. I mean, imagine a young fisherman, we've got a young guy here, he's taking a big chance nowadays. He bought his own boat, and he works a single net, a trawl net. He's out there fishing, there's 2 of them in the boat, there's 2 families to feed. He's not doing any harm to the environment. He's a sustainable fisherman. He's got a sustainable outlook in everything he does, not just in fishing. And yet, these people in open seas want to take that away from him. They just want to take it away from him and destroy his livelihood, and at the same time, probably put a couple of families into poverty. And that doesn't stand well with me, that. And it shouldn't stand well with anybody, really. Any decent human being getting the full story, the full picture. Because that guy's living in a small community with a fishing background, been brought up there, and he's doing quite well. He's doing, there's 2 good wages and all the work he gets done in the boat that gives work to local people. It's quite sad that you spend your day trying to stop people from doing that. That's the bit that gets me. It's more about the community with me, destroying communities.
Well, I'm very much in the same mind as yourself, Ken. It's more about communities, but it's lifestyles that's gone back over generations. Them to try to stop that through lies and deceit. I hope they will never be able to get away with that. It's shocking.
No, it's becoming, it's getting worse all the time. Some of the comments and things that they're coming away with now, it never used to be just as bad, but it's getting worse as the days go on. It's worrying for the companies that are buying the prawns too, because they could go to the wall as well. But what they don't think on, the likes of Whitby Seafoods are probably the biggest processor of these tails. But they don't consider for one moment there's hundreds of people working in the factories that company has. And if they go, they're no wealthy people working in these factories, and they'll be getting a minimum wage, probably more, or the living wage, probably, but their jobs are in jeopardy as well. But there's no, that doesn't come into it with them. I know it's the environment or nothing. To have a good environment, we've got to work along with it. That's the way fishermen have worked for years.
But environment, nature, but any experience I've had, and I go back 50, 60 years, fishermen work with Mother Nature, not against her.
Always have done. Always have done. Had to, because Mother Nature, you're dealing with the weather most of the time. So you had to work along with it. There's no way you would work against it. So, and it's the same with working with tides and all the rest of it. You've got to work with Mother Nature, and the changes I've seen over the years in my own career, pretty unbelievable. I mean, there's definitely, anywhere I fish, we've been out for the last 3 or 4 years with the small boat, cranes and that, and I see far more wildlife now than I seen when I went to the fishing in 1970. There's far more wildlife, cetaceans of all kinds, dolphins, porpoises, and basking sharks. All sorts. If you're out there daily, you'll see them. You go on the wrong day, you'll not see them. But I can honestly say, I keep reading all the time that RSPB is concerned about the birds. One of the reasons there's maybe no the birds in it that there used to be is I don't deny that we caught discards in the past, but we worked hard over the years to stop catching discards. But when we were catching them, there was an awful lot more birds about because we were feeding them. The birds were getting fed. All the discards went over the side were getting eaten by gannets and gulls and guillemots, all the rest of it. And there was a bigger population of them then. But since we got better, they're not getting fed the way they did before. So naturally, there's no the food going around that there used to be.
I can remember as kids, Kenneth, when we would be standing at Bray above Helmsdale Harbour, you'd be watching the boats coming in. Now, they would maybe be only 4 or 5 miles out, so they didn't take all that long steaming, and they just have taken the net on board for their last haul, and they would be coming ashore, and they were just surrounded with birds because they were getting them as well, and the seagull, the birds were feeding on the guts.
Aye, and it was the same. Boats were landing herring out of the hold of the boat. There was a lot of them falling over the quay, lying in the quay, and the gulls were everywhere getting fed. Never see that now. We're too smart now, for the gulls. No, that's my kind of opinion in open seas, and I don't think it will improve.
What's your views on the financing of this campaign groups?
Well, that worries me too, because charities finance these campaign groups, as I call them, because I don't think they deserve the title of an ENGO, because they just constantly campaign all the time. And I think that's a more deserving name for them. The way they get financed by charities is quite unbelievable. And they have a never-ending access to money if they get, and they create small groups all around the country. And the people like Flora and Fauna, Blue Marine, Esme Fairbairn, the Ellerman Trust, all these groups, they provide posts for a coordinator, and that starts them off. That creates the group. It's very well organised, but it worries me that there are people who are well connected with those campaign groups who sit on the board of the charities, and that's why they've got access to the money so easily. And now, which is even more worrying, one of the people connected with these groups sits on the board for the National Lottery and now get access to National Lottery money. That's even more worrying, because we never ever used to see any of these groups getting access to National Lottery money, but recently that's now started. So it's going to go on and on and on, and it'll get worse and worse and worse. That's the way I see it.
And how on earth can they qualify for National Lottery money other than have somebody, a friend with access to the purse strings?
You know the way it is. If somebody sitting on the board can tell you how to write the bid to get the money, you've a better chance of getting it. Sadly, that's the situation in this country at the moment.
That is absolutely alarming.
It is indeed. We've come across it quite frequently, because I'm chairman of the Clyde Fishermen's Trust, which we run as a charity, and we're trying to access money. And we've applied to some of these charities as well. and not got a penny. I would imagine because we're fishing related and we've got mobile fishermen, we'll be sort of blackballed from these charities. But we shouldn't be in with the same chance as anybody else. But it doesn't seem to work like that.
But your trust is trying to create
We're trying to help.
create employment for young people leaving school.
Through the Clyde Fishermen's Trust and Clyde Fishermen's Association, we were the only association during COVID that directly supplied money to families who were struggling. We were the only ones that supplied actual money to families who were struggling during COVID.
And yet
we can't apply to these charities. Well, we can apply, but we don't get a response. We've got to go elsewhere. You can apply for money to put people out of work, you'll get it. But if you apply for money to put people into work, you won't get it.
That pretty much sums it up.
It does. It does. I don't care too much whether I say these things nowadays. There was one point I probably couldn't say that, but I mean, I'm past that point, past the point of no return as far as that's concerned. It doesn't seem to bother campaign groups saying as much about what I do, so they've got to expect some comments in return.
Well, it's lies, deceit with the things that churn out. It should never be allowed to succeed. Never.
It's certainly not transparent, that's for sure. It's not transparent. I think it's got to be looked at more closely because it's certainly not transparent what's going on at the moment.
That's for certain. And do you have access to our ministers?
Access used to be a lot better access, I think, in the past. I know other ministers that we've had in the past. You've got to say that Fergus Ewan was a very good fisheries minister, but I can see it's been difficult for them too. I won't completely go for them because it's very difficult for anyone who's been given a portfolio as a minister to have going back. You had fisheries, agriculture and the environment all in one. And you've got the environment trying to rub shoulders with agriculture and fishing, which is nearly impossible if you're making a decision. So they have eventually kind of split it up a wee bit, where you've got, called it a minister for different things. I mean, nowadays you've got the environment and net zero, and you've got fishing and agriculture. So it's quite a big, you're covering quite a lot, and it must be very difficult for them to make a decision. I always, as I said earlier, I like to put myself in their shoes just to get things right in your head. How do they go about making a decision? You've got to do that. To give the whole situation some respect, I think you've got to do that. But getting access now seems to be getting more difficult. You get promise of a Teams meeting online. You get half an hour, 3/4 an hour at the most. Lucky if you get an hour. And by the time everybody's made all their introductions, 15 minutes is away right off. I think the sooner we go back to face-to-face meetings and do away with the Teams meetings altogether, because they can just switch it off on you and time's up. And the number of times we've had meetings with ministers in the recent past, since Fergus Ewan left, or shifted, or told to go, whichever it was, the number of times that a minister's been in the meeting, it comes maybe near the end, or maybe 10 minutes from the end, or 20 minutes from the end. Look, we're running out of time and I've got to go because there's a vote in the Parliament, and I've got to go now because there's a vote on, and then they just disappear. You would think if they were organising a meeting, you would organise it well in advance of when the vote's going to take place in the Parliament, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And I think it could be an awful lot better. Getting access is very difficult. We do get it eventually, but then I wonder sometimes whether we're dealing with a minister, or whether we're dealing with an advisor, or whether we're dealing with a civil servant that's advising. I sometimes wonder which it is, because on occasions we've spoken to ministers and they agree with everything. They keep you typical. It's what politicians do. They tell you what you want to hear. Then they go away and the advisors look at what's been said, and maybe you'll get a letter 2 or 3 weeks later to say something entirely different. And that's just the way it's been recently. It's hard to deal with that because you feel quite chuffed if you've managed to get a meeting with a minister and you get them to listen to what you've got to say. And then when they send out an email later, if we've been discussing something like the Clyde box, and then they send out a message to say that we haven't really taken on board what you said, we're just going to do this. This is what we're going to do. They don't give you reasons for it. On one occasion, our minister at the moment, Mary Gujan, who were discussing the first time the Clyde box, she didn't actually know. She had to ask how many people were actually involved in the fishery in the Clyde. Now, imagine making a decision. She'd already made a decision to close the area, and she didn't know how many people were going to be affected or were actually fishing. And I think that's atrocious to be making a decision when you don't know how many people you're actually going to affect. That's the type of things that happen.
So she made the decision before she knew that.
Yes. These things amaze me. Like, you can get quite cross. You've just got to bite your tongue, because things could be a lot better. Things could be better, I think, anyway. There's too many people involved in the decision making. If it was just a minister, fair enough. But there's so many people involved in the decision making, because all the interests have got to be served. Because of the Butte House Agreement and the agreement with the Green Party, there's an awful lot of people got to be served. So it's always going to be the reply and the answer to what they think is a problem is always going to be complicated, because it's not easy to please everybody. It's always going to be complicated. But they're making it more and more complicated as time goes on.
I see them getting referred to a lot now by opposition parties as the anti-business. But I would narrow that down and say certainly anti-fishing.
Oh, without a doubt, it's definitely in rural and coastal communities. It's definitely anti-business. So every decision they make is anti-business, and it is having a big effect in local communities. And they just don't seem to be able to grasp it. I think a lot of the problem with Holyrood in general is they don't know what's going on. And even politicians who have constituencies don't know what's going on in their own constituency. They need to get out more. They seem to be living in a bubble. It's like a small fantasy world that they're living in through in Holyrood, and they don't get out enough. I've listened to countless rural affairs committees meetings, and I just can't believe the ignorance of what's actually going on in rural communities and coastal communities. It's beyond belief. It really is. But it's never going to be any other way until that's sorted out, and they need to get out and speak to people. And I mean, we had an example. Ariana Burgess of the Green Party is an MSP for West of Scotland, a list MSP for West of Scotland. And that goes right to the Mull Kintyre, from up about Inverness down to the Mull Kintyre. And she visited the area down here. She didn't come near or attempt, and she knew she could get in touch with me or with anybody in the area to talk to fishermen. She visited all the environmental groups, small groups that have been set up in the Argyll area. She visited all of them, but she didn't come near any. I'm one of her constituents. Made no effort, and never ever does make any effort, to speak to people who her policies will put out of business. And I think that's atrocious. I mean, if you get elected, you're there, you're representing the people you don't agree with as well as the people you do agree with. I think they've got to get a grip of themselves, some politicians. They've got to get a grip, get out more and talk to the real people that they're actually affecting, instead of holding a Teams meeting or sitting in a rural affairs committee meeting. Certainly we can put information in, and we send, as Clyde fishermen send lots of emails to all the different people on the committee to tell them what our thoughts are and what's actually happening. But it's not the same as them actually coming and speaking to people and getting a real feel for what's going on. And I think that's what's creating an awful lot of problems. It's just lack of knowledge.
Do you feel that there's maybe the campaign groups have access where you haven't?
They're constantly in the Parliament lobbying. They're there all the time. They employ people to do it.
Yeah.
We can't afford to do that. But they're constantly campaigning in the Parliament.
So they
have access to everything.
So they get lottery and charity money to disrupt, to campaign against the working man.
Exactly. That's what we've reached. That's the democracy.
Yeah.
The so-called democracy.
Was there not a mention of you mentioned not Ariana Burgess, but before that you mentioned one of the MSPs. Did they not have a debate about the cod closure at the Clyde?
Oh, we've had countless debates and nothing's changed. We're in a worse position than we were before. I listened to the last debate I had a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, in the Parliament. I was quite disgusted at the lack of knowledge, even from the civil servants and scientists, because what nobody seems to be grasping about the Clyde cod closure is we voluntarily stopped fishing the cod in the particular area at the bottom end of the Clyde. We did it voluntarily, and then the second year Marine Scotland closed it, and it was mandatory. And we were quite happy with that. The main reason that we asked for a closure was because they closed the Irish Sea at the same time, and there was going to be an influx of boats coming from the Irish side to fish the spawning cod in the Clyde, and it would have destroyed it. We proposed it, and we voluntarily stopped fishing in it, and then to stop the other boats coming in, it was made mandatory, and we were quite happy. But what we were trying to save, this is the bit that civil servants and even the scientists don't seem to be able to grasp. The cod stock that we were trying to save was a stock that came into the Clyde every year and spawned and then left again. In every area of the coast around Scotland, there are small local pockets of cod, like small stocks, as there was in the rest of the Clyde. The main stock that came in spawned and left again. Now, no scientist has ever told us, hardly any science that they've done. They've been arguing for years about whether it was an Irish Sea stock or whether it was West Coast of Scotland stock. But it came in, spawned, and went away. Now, what they're doing now, they've closed the whole area, and the boats are fishing outside the area. They're putting observers out. We had observers out last week. They've got an observer in the fishery cruiser who's going aboard the boats, and they're checking the number of cod that they're catching. That's not even the same stock that we're trying to save. These are local fish that never leave the area. They've been there and they'll always be there. This is the science that they're doing. They're doing the science on cod that have got nothing to do with the problem. And I cannot believe the stupidity of the whole thing. In my 50 odd years at the fishing, I can honestly say I've never seen stupidity in the level that it's at. And that's all because it's got nothing to do with the code. It's a political decision that's come out through from the Green Party, and they've said that this is going to happen because at the end of the day, the consultation that went out the last time for the closure of the cod box, we rolled it over every year. We get asked every year. There was a consultation. We said just roll it over and didn't hardly even need to be policed. We kept clear of the area anyway. And a couple of years ago, 16 responses to the consultation, and two of them, one from our seas and the other one from, I can't remember who it was, might have been Open Seas, but one of the campaign groups, two campaign groups, objected and wanted the area made bigger. And that's the way it went. The other 14 responses were discarded because they all asked for a rollover. So you say to yourself, is it really actually worth responding to these consultations?
That's democracy the way Scotland's going, eh?
It seems to be. You know, the whole fiasco from start to finish, and I call it a fiasco, it is a real fiasco. That Clyde codpox demonstrates the way inshore fishing is in Scotland. It's just a mess.
But they continue as they spend obscene amounts of public money, so-called policing, for minimal numbers and quantities, while there's industrial overfishing and ruination of our fishing grounds further north, and not one of them are ever near them or questioning them. They don't even speak to them. They don't even speak to them. They don't call them up. They'll board a Scottish boat and sail right past the non-UK boat.
I know, it really is unbelievable, Jim, and totally agree with you on that one. The amount of money it's costing to police that, and granted, the Jura has left or seen a bit of sense, I think, and I think they realised themselves it was a bit over the top, and we've had a meeting with compliance, and sort of pulled back a wee bit on it. But what I would love to do is, the problems of science, there's no science getting done. The money that it's costing to police that, if we had that money to go and spend in science and do proper science in the area, at least we would know something. We would have something firm to go on and, justify a closure. At the moment, it can't even be justified what's happening. It's
No.
Absolutely.
And it looks as if it's all no proactivity, just reaction.
No.
It's to say where our democracy is going just beggars belief. 2 over Rule 14. That's the majority rule nowadays.
We've come across it before in other spheres, in local councils and that. We've seen that before too. I won't get into too much detail on that because it's...
But they seem to chop and change to suit them anyway. When it came to... They talked about having a rethink about the HMPAs. But as we know now, it's a rename. It's not gone away.
No.
But Kate Forbes was against that. But am I right in saying now even she's shifted camp?
Well, I don't know whether she shifted camp or not, because the SNP members in the Rural Affairs Committee were whipped to vote to keep the closure in place. And after that meeting in the room, it looked as if it was a draw. It was 4 each, but Kate Forbes voted online through it, and the vote won by 5-4 to keep the closure. But it nearly reached the point where the closure could have been annulled a couple of weeks ago. But it was Kate Forbes' vote that sort of threw it. So, I don't know, she says that she supports coastal and rural communities. She wants the Butte House Agreement scrapped. Well, she did say that in the past. Whether she still thinks that way or not, I don't know. That is the root of the problem, is the Butte House Agreement. And if she's still willing to go ahead and try and get that scrapped, I would certainly support anything she said. It didn't bode well when she voted the other way for the Clyde cod closure.
Absolutely. Yeah, what a mess for an industry that is historic. And
the thing is, Jim, this is the annoying bit. There's a good living to be made. Boats are there. We don't have a big fleet of boats the way there was back in the 80s, and maybe 20, 30 boats in Tarbert, and all the small ports in the Clyde had maybe 20, 30 boats. And it was a big fleet of boats. But we don't have that anymore. For different reasons over the years, we've been cut and cut and cut. And you can go to a different place every day and nobody's been there. So the boats are actually doing quite well. Because the prices of prawns are back to better than they were before COVID. It's looking all right, provided open seas doesn't get their way with ruining the scampi market. Most of our prawns get exported anyway to France, Spain and Italy. And the market's still quite strong. So the boats are actually doing well. In fact, over the last couple of years since COVID, our bigger boat there's done, really, really steady fishery. The guys are doing quite well, and that's good for the communities.
That thing with fishing, it supports local communities, small inshore communities. Some of them are remote, so it's really important.
You look at a fishing boat, you've got a fishing boat with 4 men, maybe 4 families. Every penny that they make is going into the local community. Most of the money that the boat's actually making, and repairs and all the rest of it, most of that goes into the community as well. And we want to bring in and encourage industries the money will go out of the community. You need to have industries locally to try and keep young families in the communities. They need full-time work, or they just leave, they go elsewhere. So it's imperative that we encourage investment in businesses that will employ people all the year round. I think that's what these people don't get, because a lot of them don't live in rural communities. There's people living in the Central Belt and working in Holyrood who haven't got a clue about living in a coastal or rural community, but they want to dictate to us how we should live.
I don't think they know the real world. Kenneth, your views, national parks.
Oh yes, that's the one that's come to light recently too, because Blue Marine had actually suggested a marine national park for the Argyll area, But I think they've put it on hold for the moment. We've spoken to the council about it, and I think they've put it on hold. But that would be the back door for HPMAs. The one that concerns me most is the national parks that they're mooting for at the moment. And yet again, that's part of the Butte House Agreement, because one of the things that they agreed to in the Butte House Agreement, the Green Party wanted another national park. And without going and checking and seeing how the other two national parks that we already have, Lomond and Trossachs and the Cairngorms National Park, nobody's going to check to see if everybody's happy with them, the people that live in the national park. And it turns out a lot of the people are not happy in the national parks. Since the applications are in now for the national parks, and there's quite a few have changed their minds. And the one that worried me was Lochaber and Small Isles National Park, because the Lochaber, the Fort William area, it takes in Small Isles like Muck and Egg and Rum, Canna, all that area, and round about Malig, all inshore waters, prawn areas where boats fish. And what could happen is you come under the jurisdiction of a national park, and then they make the rules where you fish or what you can fish. That didn't bode well for me, but I was really quite worried about that. And the fishermen up there, they fish there in the summer, and the fishermen are very concerned about it. And a lot of the creel fishermen concerned as well. And some of them are very anti the national park in Lochaber. There was an application actually went in from Lochaber, and a lot of people not very happy about it. They had a demonstration in Fort William a few weeks ago, once the local people got to hear what was actually happening, because nobody seemed to know it was going on. Nobody seemed to know that it was going forward as a national park. It was a consultation similar to the one for the HPMAs. So seem to be very good at consultations, government nowadays, to suit themselves.
The thing that did crop to mind when you were saying about not going to the Trossach, Cairngorms, or any of the ones that are there just now, from the other things we've said, I don't know if they're in any ways interested what the people think.
Well, I've read a lot online. I joined one of the groups in the Lochaber area when I seen the fishing was, the area concerned, and I really got my eyes opened reading some of the stuff online about the way the national park has been handled. It's a bit of a disgrace, really. How anybody could make a decision, that the consultation that's been done, holding meetings, and there was only a certain number of people turning up. The group that was pushing for the national park and doing the application were a few Green councillors from the Green Party, and they seemed to be pushing the whole agenda. And an awful lot of the local people hadn't got a clue what's going on. I know for a fact that the majority of people in the Fort William area, what they would like to see is a new hospital, and they want the roads repaired, potholes, the roads, the A82 and the A83 down our way, they're badly needing repaired, they're full of potholes, and I think most of the local people reckon that the infrastructure, the argument is that the national park is going to bring more tourists. But at the moment, they don't have the infrastructure to handle more tourists. And you're going to bring more folk in, and you've not got the proper infrastructure. The folk will never come back again anyway. But daft. You've got to get the infrastructure in place before you invite people in.
It's just quite serious agendas. And a government to take so little heed of the people that are voting for them. It puts a democracy non-existent.
I know, it's do as I say.
Yeah, not do as I do.
It's quite worrying, but then again, we can't get too depressed. We don't want to be tarred with the same brush as campaign groups and be negative all the time. We've got to try and be positive, and we can see a way out of this to improve things and hope that people are listening to what we're saying, because if we don't, we'll end up in the same bog as the campaign groups, completely distressed with mental problems, with all the negativity that's in their heads. We're better not to go down that road. We've got to keep our heads a bit fresh.
I think you've given us a good exit, Kenny. I think, as the old saying, always leave on a high.
Well, we've got to, Jim. We've got to think positive. We've always got to think positive and hope that things will improve. And some people will see sense in the end. I'm glad you asked me to do the podcast because it gives you a chance to air all your grievances and talk about some of the positive things as well. So
Well, I got to really thank you so much and say I honestly feel, Kenneth, your research and the work you've done is admirable. I think it's amazing, and no wonder you've got all the accolades and the recognition that you have. I would say you deserve every bit of it because the work you put in. And you've obviously got an enormous passion for our industry, which as I said, I think it's admirable.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words, Jim. It's very, very nice and comforting to hear that. But the passion's not going to leave me. I mean, I'm coming on now. I'm catching up on you. But I've got no plans to give up on my passion for fishing and for the communities, especially the community I live in, but for coastal communities in general. We can't give up on that because there's too many businesses and too many lives at stake for us to give up. But thank you very much for having me in your podcast.
Thank you, Kenny.